Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, it has certainly been a week. I'm off to California on business this Saturday to next Tuesday, so I'm not sure if next week's episode's going to be posted in time. Sort of depends on whether I take my big old laptop with me, but it's just a really difficult process to make and post an episode from my iPad. This is the first business travel, like on an airplane, that I'm going to be doing in 2.5 years, and I don't want to overpack and underpack and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, that's next week. This week, I had my annual physical last Thursday, which was that was interesting. See, last year's physical started the process that led to my leukemia diagnosis. I didn't exactly have any trepidation leading into this year about that sort of stuff. And in fact, I had a really good conversation with the nurse who did the prep work, like all the basic stuff in advance. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer in 2016, and we kind of talked through the mental stages of diagnosis and, in her case, treatment and what it feels like to be lucky in comparison to other people, no matter how dire your own situation is, when you realize how much worse things could be and how much it helps to share, I guess, and to be able to help. Anyway, she's been fine since then, and it was really good just to talk with someone, especially someone who's known me, at least in this context, for a whole lot of years. Anyway, the physical was fine, but a couple of funny things happened. First, my doctor recommended I get the shingles vaccine because I'm over 50. And I remembered my old man having shingles like 40 years ago. What an ass walloping that was. So, yeah, I was on board with that. But he also recommended I get the pneumonia vaccine, Prevnar, because I'm now technically immunocompromised. This is normally meant for people 65 and older. So he shot me up with both of those. Actually, the nurse did. And that left me a fevered, aching wreck all weekend. Shingrix or Zostavax, I'm not sure which one I got, but it just rolled through my system, flu, fever, chills, shaking, aches, etc. Prevnar, which went into the left shoulder, well, the shingles one went on my right. Prevnar caused my left shoulder to swell up to the point at which it looked like I was cosplaying Rafael Nadal. Like, it was just huge and visible, and now just a rash, etc. Nothing bad, but so swollen and painful I couldn't even sleep on that side, which exacerbated the whole whooping of a weekend that I took. Anyway, I'm all back to normal now, but what was funny was the only times I've felt sick in the last few years now has been my immune responses to vaccines, not actual illness. I haven't had a cold, haven't had the flu, etc., but a couple of the COVID shots I've had, plus these vaccines, just really left me wiped out thinking, boy, I really don't want to be sick again. Now, the other funny thing that happened is we did blood work after the physical, and that was Thursday, and I got an email with a link to the results on Friday morning. And it's currently Tuesday, and I still haven't looked at them. It's not that I'm scared or anything of what the results are going to be. It's that there's no point to my looking at them before my follow-up with my doctor, which is going to be tomorrow afternoon. So I told myself, all that's going to happen if I look these things over is that I'm going to misinterpret what's there, either for better or for worse. Either I'll see things that say warning or, marginal, and I'll freak out, or things that I think aren't a problem. The doctor's going to say, actually, Gil, this is a trend. This isn't good. But more to the point, whatever results show up, there'd be absolutely nothing I could do about them before I connect with my doctor. And if it's the case that, like, my white blood cell count is so high that it means I should move up my late July check-in with the oncologist, the doctor would likely have called by now. He would have seen that Friday or even yesterday. So rather than just having to know and getting the information even without context, I pretty much put it out of my mind. There hasn't even been a temptation of, maybe I'll just click and see if there's something that gives something about that. No, nothing. I talked about this in a different context last year, but ever since my big diagnosis and my change of life, especially the weird phase before I got the diagnosis, I am much more reconciled now to the notion that sometimes the state is already determined. And worrying about it isn't going to do a goddamn thing. You'll find out what the state is at the appropriate time, probably with the appropriate sense of treatment or whatever. But you can't do anything about the state, so don't freak the hell out. That said, the notion of health permeates this week's podcast, so we're going to dive into it. My guest this time is Ira Nadel, who is the author of Philip Roth, A Counterlife, a literary biography that came out last year from Oxford University Press. I point this out because Ira's biography of Roth came out in March 2021, which was just a few weeks before Blake Bailey's authorized biography of Roth came out. Some of you may remember that I was planning on recording with Bailey about his Roth bio before the pretty bad sex / groomer of preteen students / creeper / raping someone scandal erupted for Bailey. Thankfully, Ira does not have any scandalous history near as I can tell, and he has written an awfully good literary biography in Philip Roth, A Counterlife. So while we didn't get a Philip Roth bio podcast last year, we're getting it this year, and it's the book that doesn't have all that stink attached to it. So what Ira does is, since he's not an authorized biographer working directly with interviews with Roth, etc., he taps a lot of great sources, interviews, documents, analysis of Roth's published and unpublished work, and more to build a life of Roth that punctures some of the mythology that Roth constructed about himself. And he explores these areas of Roth's life and his work, like the marketing and financial complaints that led Roth to jump from publisher to publisher over the years, what he wrote to and about his first wife and the role she played in his development as a writer, because posthumously, first, as the marriage falls apart, and then, during their divorce fight, and then posthumously when she dies young, Roth writes horrible, horrible things about her. But Ira explores who Roth was in the moment with her and how different that relationship was. And he gets into Roth's health, which really is, as he puts it, one of the keys to understanding Roth and his work. Some of the health woes that he suffered over the years, and the role of swimming in Roth's work and his life. All of it comes to build this really complex figure from a literary era we're never going to see again. And he also, one of the things he explores, which I was really interested in, is Roth's work with writers behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War, and also his relationship with Primo Levi, and what Europe and, quote unquote, the other Europe did to expand Roth's world as a writer. It's tough to do justice to Ira's book because he really does create this sort of man in full. Like I say, a complex figure with conflicting desires and plenty of anxiety and rage, often misplaced, but enough to keep the writing engine going for decades. Like I say, it's a literary career that can't exist nowadays. One of the things that Ira points out, we discuss it in the conversation, is how Roth never earned back his advances on his contracts. Nowadays, he'd have been, bounced out or left to small presses over the years, but in a different world, he managed to keep getting these big literary contracts for book after book after book, 30 plus of them over the decades. Anyway, the biography really gave me some new ways to understand Roth's books and the man behind them, and the through lines for a lot of them, beyond the obvious ones that are sort of cliches, and some of the ones that I'd come up with over the years that, Ira sees in a different way, just from reading him differently, from being a different age himself. Anyway, I was awfully glad to sit down with Ira for a conversation about Roth and Philip Roth, A Counterlife, as well as his own work and how his appreciation and understanding of Roth really changed over the course of the project. So, that is to say, if you're only going to read one biography of Philip Roth, do yourself a favor, read Ira Nadel's Philip Roth, A Counterlife, and kind of maybe skip the Blake Bailey one. Now, here's Ira's bio from the book. Ira Nadel is professor of English at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, and the author of biographies of Leonard Cohen, Tom Stoppard, David Mamet, and Leon Uris. He has also published Biography, Fiction, Fact, and Form, Joyce and the Jews, and Modernism's Second Act, in addition to a critical companion to Philip Roth. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Ira Nadel. Tell me about your history with Philip Roth and what led to this biography.
Well, that's a good question to begin. It goes back quite a long way. I am from New Jersey. I was born in the same hospital as Philip Roth. And when I was, an adolescent, I would go to Newark quite often because that's where my mother was born. And then I started to read Roth as soon as Goodbye Columbus came out. But the real fascinating development was that when I was in graduate school, I'd say 85% of my PhD oral exam was on Portnoy's Complaint. And that's because the book had been out several months, but my committee, I was at Cornell, which had some very distinguished people on it, starting with M.H. Abrams, of course, the general editor of the Norton Anthology of English Literature, had heard about this book, but rather in an obscure way. So instead of talking about Thomas Carlyle and George Eliot and renunciation in the 19th century Victorian novel, which was my topic, we spent our time talking about Portnoy's Complaint. And then I kind of continued with an interest in Roth. And actually, when I was an undergraduate, I did go to a talk he gave at Princeton. He was there for about 2 years. And he was very nervous. I remember a young writer who kind of commanded the audience, especially when you have those insightful questions. This is going back quite a few years. Do you write with a pen or a typewriter? And he frowned and he said, it's irrelevant. And then he went on to try and address some issues of American literature. So I've always been interested in Roth. He wrote about an environment that I was familiar with. And then over the years, as I read more, I tried to understand him, both stylistically and thematically, and started to publish an occasional article. And then I ended up doing this reference book, a kind of encyclopedia to Roth's writing, which then led to biography, which was another stream of mine really ever since graduate school as well.
Yeah, we'll talk about the other literary biographies that you've done, but I shudder to ask, biggest challenge in terms of trying to encompass Roth in the context of the book? I mean, he comes off as a fragmented human being, not even as a human being, a fragmented artist, person, Jew, etc. How big a challenge was that maybe compared to some of the other biographies that you've done over the years?
Well, every biography is a challenge, but the challenges take different forms. And with Roth, the challenge for me was understanding somewhat his background, identifying with a number of his characters, but at the same time trying to construct a kind of critical distance based on a literary approach to Roth, not so much a historical, if I could make that distinction. And what I tried to do was synthesize the very thing you just described. That is to say, his life is a life in fragments, whether it's his Judaism, whether it's his attachment to universities, whether it's the European dimension, and whether it is his relationship with women. So my attempt is an attempt to kind of synthesize all of these things. But I didn't know where I was going to start. This is one of the things I like about biography. I don't really begin with a plan, you might say. It tends to evolve, and the evolution occurs in relation to archives that I have access to, people I speak to, and my own general sense of what might work as an approach to create this kind of synthesis. And that's where every biography I've done has a different approach to it, because in a sense, I'm looking for some signature event or moment which could occur at any point in the timeline of the subject's life, and perhaps use that as a starting point. And I never know where I'm going to end. That's also another part.
I've heard Robert Caro say he knows the last line of the LBJ. We'll say 5 books. Yeah. He still has to get there, but he knows those final words that are going to be in place. So at least there's that. But did you have false starts in that respect with this? Were there areas you thought, oh, this is obviously where it's going to go, and it just didn't fit?
Well, it wasn't so much that. It's the discovery of new information. I'll give you an example in a moment that suddenly takes on a greater force than I had realized. And with Roth, it was medicine and his health and his body. And among the archives, which are now available, which hadn't been available, certainly previous to his death, is a medical history that he himself wrote. It's extraordinary. And it's a document that chronicles almost every medical event in his life, starting with his early hernia operation. I think he was 9 or 10, followed by a knee operation caused by a baseball accident, through the heart operations that happened and the cataracts that he had done. And of course, if you look at the literature, something like the anatomy lesson, it's all about medicine. It's all about the body. And I wasn't as conscious as I should have been at the beginning of the impact of physicality. And I'm not talking about sex here. Just his...
Although you are also.
Yeah, just his general awareness of deterioration, if we want to use that term. I mean, the obsession with swimming in particular, I found very fascinating, and actually published an article called Aquatic Roth. And it's all about swimming in Roth and about his own swimming. If you recall the opening paragraph of Goodbye Columbus, it occurs at a swim club where Neil Klugman watches Brenda jump into the swimming pool. So swimming is just one aspect of it. But I think the redirection of what I thought I might be doing occurred when I recognized the significance of the medical in his life. And of course, patrimony is all about that. So throughout...
My sneaky favorite is Everyman.
Oh, well, there you are. There you are.
I mean, that's almost the entire medical history covered in a 200-page novel.
Yeah, exactly. So to find the document and to recognize how revelatory the medical was, to me, was a step. One other I'll quickly mention was his relationship with his editors. he had very sustained and deep connections with the editors, starting with George Starbuck, who was the editor of Goodbye Columbus, who was an acquaintance from the University of Chicago, to the late editors, particularly Jason Epstein, the editor at Random House, his second editor at Random House, responsible for Portnoy's Complaint. And I was able to spend quite a bit of time with Jason Epstein. And to me, these are very important figures. And that leads to another connected subject, Roth and his publishers. So it's like
I will say, until you really brought that up in the book, I look up at my Roth shelf over here and realize that almost every 2 or 3 books, it's another imprint.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
FSG to Random to Simon and Schuster to this one to that one.
And back to Houghton Mifflin. He started there and he ended there. And that in itself is a wonderful story that can be expanded, because I have had the opportunity to look at a number of publishers' archives. The 2 most interesting, of course, Houghton Mifflin, and the papers are at the Houghton Library in Harvard. And then, of course, Random House, and those papers are at Columbia University. There's so much in that material. I mean, that's another book, Roth and his publishers, which is Roth and his editors.
Yeah. I mean, you had that line that the story of Roth was the story of his editors in the book, which I noted and figured we should talk about. But, how much, I mean, you're compressing to 450 pages. How many other, I would either say rabbit holes or, things that would open up into a full book did you find over the course of this?
Well, certainly Roth in Europe. I mean, people have noted this. They've talked about it. We talk about Roth and the other Europe, the whole series. But there is a great deal more to say about that. And in particular, I think Roth and I'll call it internationalism. What I really mean is Roth and his relationship with people like Primo Levi and Milan Kundera, with even Al Alvarez, R.B. Kitai. In other words, widening the circle. Take Roth out of America. Take him out of North America. He did it himself. I mean, but it's been somewhat underplayed. And much more can be done about that. I think also, I was just going to add Roth and music is another area that certainly could be expanded. There are plenty of allusions in the work. And he had a great, I guess I would say love of music, classical music, not pop music. Tom Stoppard likes pop music, but not Roth. So that's just another category that could be expanded.
Yeah, I was going to say the book, I mean, you really hammer home the Americanness of Roth and the content. But it raised the question for me that I've had for many years, where he always, argued, I'm not a Jewish writer, I'm an American writer.
Mm-hmm. Well,
do you think he was bullshitting everyone or trying to convince himself?
I don't think he was trying to convince himself. I think the difficulty was convincing himself he was a Jewish writer. I think he was an American writer before that. I have a piece I did recently called The Early Roth, and it begins with an anecdote that when Roth would come home from school, mostly in grammar school, not high school, he would walk into the house, which they were all, like 3 blocks away, and announce to his mother, Lafayette, I am here. And this is a famous statement that was made, at the end of the War of Independence, and a general returning to Lafayette's grave and saying, thank you, you have done a great thing. And this American identity, his earliest readings were all in, a kind of American pop fiction of the day, often historical. Tom Paine, the title of an important novel. He and the whole World War II thing, there was no question that he was American, and that identity, and that this is the point, the American identity preceded, and in many ways, I think, became more important for him than the Jewish identity. And here might be, both of these identities were kind of imposed upon him. He was born in America. His parents were born in America. He was an American, and he had all the American trappings, whether it's with the sports, whether it's the boys doing things with his gang. He didn't rush off to synagogue. He didn't enjoy Hebrew school. He didn't go to Israel until he was invited in the 1960s. In other words, it wasn't on the agenda. But being in America was just a natural thing for him. We could talk for hours about Roth and sports, and in particular, his favorite sport, baseball. I mean, right. What more American can you get?
Yeah, I just wonder in terms of the writing takes off when he embraces his Jewishness, and whether that's how reconcilable those are, I suppose, given our whole Jewish sense of being other wherever we are.
Well, yes, but remember he had to be pushed to write about the sure. Jewishness. Richard Stern at the University of Chicago, in hearing Roth, who is now kind of back as an English instructor, tells him about growing up in Newark and the swim clubs and, Montclair and South Orange and Irvington and all that. And Stern says, that's what you should be writing about. And he says, yeah, maybe I should. Because here's the other thing Roth has, which does distinguish him as a writer. He has the voice. He has the rhetorical voice to convey that world, and it's a world of complete conviction and sincerity, and it's authentic. It's not fake. He's not imitating. He is that exactly the way Saul Bellow in The Adventures of Augie March is Chicago and is Jewish Chicago, but in a different register.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was disappointed the book didn't have the line from Bruce J. Friedman's memoir about Roth saying that Bellow was, we'll just say, the father to the rest of them when it came to mm-hmm. him, Friedman, and some of the subsequent writers. But yeah, he just said it in a more offensive manner, which I won't repeat here. So I'll tell you off mic. It's fine. Okay. But toughest part to research? I mean, I know the archives they're not coherent and they're not, in a single location. Sometimes it's other people's letters in other locations. But what did you find toughest?
That's very academic. I'm accustomed to that. If you're working on Joyce, you go to 3 different archives for, Ezra Pound, et cetera. So there's nothing new in that. And the same is true with Bellow. The toughest part, I think, is putting it together, figuring it out. How can it cohere? And I suppose for me, what brought that coherence together was not the Americanness, it was not the Jewishness, but it was the sense of discontent, which is where I really start the book, as you know. And it has many roots in his personal growing up and his early adulthood with the first marriage. And then it kind of accelerates into ideas of betrayal, that there are individuals who appear to be my friends, but in fact, in one way or another, they have, in his mind, betrayed him. And then that takes you to the next level, which is anger. And it's Ben Taylor in his, lovely memoir of Roth, where he says Roth never stopped litigating the past. He couldn't get away. And the example I'd like to cite is John Updike, because Updike was very critical of Operation Shylock in a New Yorker review. And then in something else that Updike wrote, it was kind of a summary of recent autobiographies, literary autobiographies. He makes an allusion to Claire Bloom and Leaving a Doll's House. And he refers to the book in kind of a neutral, slightly positive way. Well, Roth almost never
lost his mind.
Yeah, well, he did. And he never spoke to Updike again until Updike's last year of living. But even after, and this is the point, after Updike died, Roth still went after him. He still criticized and complained and was upset about this. So Ben is absolutely right. He never stopped litigating the past. I think I have a line, no insult ever, forgotten in terms of Roth. And it was part of his makeup. And I think it's something it wasn't a pose. He really felt this way. And
trust me, if you heard the shouting match I had with my mother on Mother's Day, there's a degree to which certain Jews cannot let anything go under any circumstances all their life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you might have been 6 years old when this happened and whatever. But he had that in spades. And with the women in particular, it grew to be, obsessive. And you start looking in the archive, and especially with the more recent material that's come available. And what I mean by that is a very important archive now at Princeton, which was Ben Taylor's archive, which is now mostly available. There are stories about access, not access, and so forth. There's a great deal of this anger present there. There are other archives. There's actually the main archives, the Library of Congress, but there's some other materials at the Beinecke Library at Yale that are also important for Roth. The Janet Malcolm correspondence, for example. So that's a kind of umbrella. And for me, that shaped my effort to capture Roth and to kind of understand him. And then it starts, if you recall, with this letter he wrote, I think it's 1967, to his first agent saying, my discontent with, and then he goes through this incredible litany of what was wrong with the publication of, I think it was the second book that he published. Their advertising was terrible, the printing was terrible, the editing was terrible, and, it goes on and on. And he never forgave these people. And in that instance, just to go on for one more moment, it was his early editor, second editor, Joe Fox, that he turned on. And Fox at the beginning, Joe Fox was his second editor, but his first at Random House. And he too was a young but experienced editor who really worked hard to promote and to support Roth. And Roth turned against him in such a virulent way. They had to break off. And that's how Jason Epstein gets involved, because he says, I can't really work with this Joe Fox anymore. And it was Joe Fox who actually loaned Philip Roth money to pay for his psychiatrist, which Roth kept very careful records of and paid him back. And quickly, here comes another topic, Philip Roth and money. Oh, my goodness. Now, there's something to open up.
And it dovetails with the, my history with editors / publishers. That's, everything seemed to get tied to getting this advance, or although it raises the question that you bring up, I think Epstein tells him his work never, makes up the advance.
Yes.
His sales
Jason
never actually reach that point.
Told me directly, I remember it quite vividly, that Philip Roth only earned back his advance or advances with two books, of course, Portnoy's Complaint, and then the surprise book, The Plot Against America. He never earned back his advances for any other book. So here you have a writer of tremendous critical success and to a degree popular success, but not particularly earning a lot of money. This is not even Norman Mailer. Because for whatever we think of Norman Mailer, his books sold because he creates around him a kind of posture which really people are quite interested in. What is he going to? He's writing about Marilyn Monroe. He's writing about Muhammad Ali. He's, writing about the moon. And his books sell because of that. Roth's books, if we really get into the weeds, to use the cliche, and get sales figures, are disappointing. And the idea of earning back the advance, because remember, what was happening in book publishing too was that when you signed on with a publisher, it was usually for 2 or 3 titles. And that's where you got a big advance. It isn't for one book. So that's another aspect. If you develop the topic of Roth and his publishers, you move into Roth and the economics of publishing. Now, he did very well, I mean, personally, but from the point of view of you as a publisher, you're not.
That's what I find interesting. And it takes place in that historical moment where you have these mega companies buying publishers and they want to create a splash, so they're willing to put up a couple $100,000 for Roth.
That's right. So that
that career couldn't happen today.
Right.
You know?
That would be impossible, that the money is just not there. However, again, to speak of today, the marketing of books is different than it would have been at that particular time. So today, with social media and authors giving constant Zoom interviews and podcasts, it's different. There's no physical dimension, which I'm thinking more of advertising and marketing and, the author going on tour. Well, that's kind of, ended. That doesn't happen anymore. And he didn't do a lot of that. He didn't like readings. He didn't travel around. He did it with Patrimony, which is quite interesting because that was the book that meant the most in that part of his career, I think, to him. It was the most personal and in a lot of ways the most honest. But he didn't go do readings for the ghostwriter or, put the counter life, nothing like that.
He was my white whale, the guest I was dying to get. And I can't remember if I've filled you in on it or not, but I've mentioned it on the show. I was apparently conceived while my mother was reading Portnoy's Complaint to my father.
Let me revise my book. Hold on. That's wonderful.
Yeah, well, I figured if I could have gotten close enough to him, that would have been the closer. That would have been, I'll give this guy the time of day.
Yeah.
I was born early 1971, so it pretty much tracks. But, I'd asked people who were, I asked Benjamin Taylor after our podcast. He's like, "Oh, Philip would have loved doing this with you." And this is all after Roth's death.
Yeah.
Nathan Englander, on the other hand, was like, "No, he never would have done this in a million years. This is not a milieu he would have been comfortable with." And the kicker really came over seeing all the shaping he tried to do of his biography and how much everything had to be controlled, to the point at which when I asked Robert McCrum last year, did you have a don't meet your idols moment, without even thinking about it, he said the experience with Philip Roth was the worst of my life.
No kidding. Interesting.
Yeah, he said the publisher, everyone, they had to control every question I asked, every response had to be rewritten and done. He said it was absolutely a nightmare that, they insisted on absolute control, which presumably was driven by Roth himself.
Oh, entirely. I mean, Hermione Lee, who I can't say I know, but we've met and we've talked, explained that when she did the interview for the Paris Review, right, The Art of Fiction, it was like an extra almost 12 to 14 months with his reviewing the transcript and making edits and changes so that it appeared the way he wanted it to be.
That's why when the idea of him pitching the biography to her and her saying, "No, I'm doing the Stoppard one," you figured that's probably the main cause. But I kind of figured she may have had the, I don't want to get embroiled in this biography vibe too. But, there's a whole separate Philip Roth biography story we can talk about after we get through the real good questions.
Oh, yes, indeedy. Yeah. Yeah. But this is the two, sorry to interrupt, but there's the two sides of Roth. The certainly withdraw, I'm living up in Connecticut on my farmhouse and I don't see people. And then the public side, which must be controlled and is always controlled. And there's no question that it's going to be my way or no way. And that's time and time again. And I would argue that this happened even after he died, that he left so many instructions and prescriptive statements about how things should happen that he really is trying to use a phrase from Everyman, square the hole. And that phrase, square the hole, is actually said by the gravedigger. If you look at the very end of Everyman, where he describes the precision with which he's digging out grave sites. And he keeps saying, I'm trying to square the hole. And he has one little simple tool and a shovel. That's Roth. But what's fascinating is he's doing it from the grave, after he's dead. Fascinating.
I was at Sandy McClatchy's memorial service, which happened to be maybe a day or two after Roth had died in 2018. And Sandy's husband put together the big memorial service, but said that Sandy specified exactly what the sequence should be, what the music should be, who should be speaking. Nothing on the scale of what you depict with Roth's memorial service and the funeral and everything else.
Oh, absolutely. Absolute total instructions. And what's really great is that he specified who was not to attend.
That's what I was going to imply.
The memorial service, specifically Claire Bloom and Francis Duplessis Gray, who died before he did.
Yeah.
Or before the memorial service anyway. So he was very strict in these aspects of his life, and he was strict with the publication of his books, how they were to appear, the jackets, the color of the jackets, the placement of the biographical notice in the early books. It was too high on the page. He has letter after letter to, I think, George Starbuck, with Goodbye Columbus, that this is all wrong, and certainly with Joe Fox. He just disliked the way Letting Go and When She Was Good were produced as books, and he wouldn't forget it. He wouldn't overlook it. He wouldn't say, I'm a new writer. This is my first complete novel. Letting Go, and I'm just happy to get the book out and to get it noticed. That didn't matter. He wrote his own advertisements.
I was going to say, when you talk about that flap copy, he was actually composing that too.
Yes, exactly. And so he composed his own marketing plan for Goodbye Columbus. He's 25, 26 years old. He's telling Houghton Mifflin how to do it. It's remarkable, but it's consistent. It's through to the end of his life. He didn't change. It wasn't something unusual.
What do you wish you hadn't learned?
Oh,
is there something in there that you're like, man, I wish I did not come across this,
I think money and the way he used money, the way he used money with women, I think we can say it was pretty manipulative. The way he used money with friends. Yes, I'm thinking now of some of his high school friends, most of whom became professionals. They became doctors, they became accountants, they became lawyers, but their lives weren't always very smooth. And he stayed in touch with a small circle, maybe about 6 or 8, and several of them ran into some business problems and personal issues, and they would ask him for some support, a loan. It could be for $5,000, it could be for $50,000, and reluctantly, after putting these people under a reasonable amount of pressure, he would loan the money, but with great stipulation and a document, and they would pay it back. They weren't trying to get away with things, but I think the money issue became for him something that he controlled as much as possible. And, your earlier comment about looking at the different imprints, why did he move from this publisher to that publisher? The positive reason is he got attached to certain editors like Aaron Asher who moved, but the more important reason is money. And once he hooked up with Andrew Wiley, the money became very good, and he just went where the money was. And if it wasn't going to meet what he felt he was worth, he wasn't going to go there. I'm not going to bother with you. I can find someone else. So maybe the money. Writing
these awful comments about the publishers and his letters to other people about how terrible the last publisher was, and
Well, it didn't stop there, but I think the money is problematic, and I have to say, what did surprise me a bit, what appears to be, although we don't know the whole story, and I want to emphasize that, a certain lack of generosity or a kind of philanthropic impulse. However, having said that, I have to mention two things. One is he did set up a kind of writers' fellowship at Bucknell, and it allows a qualified young writer to take up residence in a house there, and expenses are paid. I think it's for 2 months. But more importantly is the Philip Roth Personal Library established in Newark, for which, again, he set out very careful parameters as to what it should be and the work it should contain. And he set aside several $1 million to see that it happen. And it is wonderful. And I am a great fan and supporter of the Philip Roth Personal Library.
I was so happy to get to go there last year for the show. It was great. I actually have 2 of Roth's books, extras of his own books from his shelves.
Oh.
They have in sort of a storage room. It's like, yeah, he had dozens of extra copies of, certain books. And you can take any of these if you want. I'm like, well, yeah, I guess I can. I just grabbed a couple because, these were in Philip Roth's possession, and they happen to be things that I'd maybe read on the Kindle and didn't have a print version of. So,
right. I think also it's unique because, and you can correct me, I don't believe there's another American modern writer who has a similar library available for research and for the students and for the public and for anybody wandering around. There's no Bellow library. Yes, there are archives, but they're not available.
A physical, a place to go.
A place to go. And that makes it very special. And I'm really proud that he did that, where I can see his baseball cap and I can see the 69-cent pens, these little felt-tip pens that he liked to write with. What happened? I expected him to have a Mont Blanc. No, nothing like that.
Again, you would have been the guy asking the inappropriate question.
Exactly.
What do you write with? Yeah.
Well, right. Goes back to 1964 or whatever time. Yeah. But that library is a gem. And I know it's receiving more and more attention. I know that now international scholars are coming. I know people have been there from Germany, France, Latin America. And this is great. I think this is wonderful that he made all of this material available. And people are reading it. They're using it. So that, is a great thing.
Do you think he over-romanticized Newark and or his childhood?
I think he sentimentalized it. Yes, I think he did.
Okay, that's
absolutely. And you see it in Patrimony, and you certainly see it in the early works. But by the time you get to American Pastoral, Newark's different. Newark's burning to the ground, right?
Yeah.
And they have the big issue. In part, we could talk about industrial Roth. Is that the glove-making company has got to shift to Puerto Rico, I think it is, because it's cheaper to manufacture the stuff offshore. So the gritty Newark is a bit held back, but it does come in the sort of late books, but not in a realistic way. I think American Pastoral, we could talk about how Newark changes in the work of Philip Roth, but certainly in the early career. And even in a bit, now I'll contradict myself, when you get to Nemesis, of course, the late novel dealing with polio, his view of Newark is more positive than negative, even though the disease, is taking over. But historically, it never really happened that way. So.
Yeah. But it's still, his view of Newark in his youth remains that sentimental one, and Newark as he leaves and as it becomes something very different. That's a different world that he's.
Well, he left Newark. He left Newark. I mean, physically, and geographically, and he may have lived in, he had his apartments in New York. And then, of course, briefly in Woodstock, and then he moves to Cornwall Bridge, where he buys the farm. But he doesn't go back to Newark unless there's a very specific reason. And he usually comes. It was very funny for his 80th birthday celebration in Newark. He and a whole posse of people from New York all came in the black cars, as we say, from New York. And the second it was over, he jumped in the car and he went back. He wasn't hanging around Newark. Are you kidding?
Right. Although, as Rosemary Steinbaum tells the story, and I think you've got it in the book too, he did take the Philip Roth tour, the bus tour of Newark.
but not during the birthday weekend. That was earlier. But he surprised
there's a high school
people,
reunion or something he was in town
by
for.
appearing. And he also, one of his current girlfriends, she came, and he wanted, in a sense, to show her she was the Australian woman. But he didn't deny it, but he didn't long for it either. And even his parents left. They moved to Elizabeth. Okay.
Yeah.
And he talks about that in Patrimony, driving out, to see the father and so forth. So it's crucial. It provided the backdrop for the early work, but it didn't remain as the critical linchpin, you might say, for the career. He happily, I think, moved on, and he moved on to other topics, other places.
Right. Do you think there was a literary influence that he didn't transcend in his work? I mean, you bring up James and Kafka and other figures, especially from his, we'll say pre-Jewish phase when he was, an American writer, in terms of Sherwood Anderson and Willa Cather, et cetera. But is there someone that you feel he never really got past this person's writing in his own work?
I think Primo Levi. I think, is the critical figure there, and maybe Isaac Babel. Those two strike me as being instrumental, significant, difficult to perhaps categorize writers. It's not, in other words, when he studied Henry James in graduate school, okay, we kind of got James. We know where he sits. We know about his influence and his importance. But Babel and Primo Levi stand out as not really contemporaries, Primo Levi a little bit more so, but the experiences that they had and how they wrote about them is something that I think he was engaged with, he was grappling with. And then to have Primo Levi's suicide was a tremendous blow to Roth. And I talk a little bit about that, and Roth going to an Italian journalist in London who initially put Roth and Primo Levi together was something he had a lot of difficulty, I think, overcoming. Aaron Appelfeld might be another writer, but you see what's interesting is they're all international. You have Isaac Babel from Odessa, and of course you have Primo Levi from Turin, Italy, and then you have Aaron Appelfeld, who, German or Austrian, and then Israeli. So this is part of the widening of Roth in terms of his literary ambitions and his vision. And when you talked earlier about what else might there be for Roth, that's what this should be, is Roth the internationalist, and Roth and Russian writing, which I think is also very, very important.
It's interesting to me because in the book, I'm going to flatten it and you're going to correct me as I say it. It feels not that his exploration of the other Europe was calculated, but you at least frame it in a way that it seems like a response to the absolutely batshit line that he wasn't Jewish enough because his family wasn't Holocaust adjacent. Which
is a charge.
Mine were, and I would much rather my family wasn't Holocaust adjacent, and we were perfectly assimilated American. But and as I wonder that perception that you had of what drove him into the Eastern European and Russian writers during the Cold War.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with repression and censorship. And it starts with whom? Kafka. Because this is what takes him there in the first place. Now, remember, he's been with Claire Bloom. He's living 6 months of every year in London. He's had this fascination with Kafka almost from the beginning. And so he decides, I'm going to go to the Czech Republic during, or wasn't called then, Czechoslovakia, during a time of repression, and where he's followed, where he's threatened, and that only intensifies given his own personal sense of, don't tell me what to do, attitude. And then through translators, basically, he gets to meet so many of these writers who can't be writers, that the government and the politics have stepped in and shaped their lives and prevented them from being who they really want to be. And then he develops friendships with people like Milan Kundera in particular, but there are others as well, and I discuss them. So I'm not so sure it's the Jewishness as much as it is this discovery that these writers have survived, and they have survived under these horrible conditions, and I'm going to do what I can to get their work better known and better read. And so the series starts. And what's interesting about the series are not just the books selected, but the people he asks to write introductions and how they contribute and what they contribute, including Updike, and most interestingly, Irving Howe, who was his big nemesis, but Howe writes one. So it's a really interesting story. It's more than just the publication of these works from Eastern Europe. It's the context. And we're back again to publishers and editors and introductions, what's called the metafictional, and metatextual aspects of these works.
Yeah. And that's, to use common, Netflix era parlance, you do have a Zuckerman extended universe of Roth's work where you're either direct Zuckerman novels or ones in which he's imagining the lives of other people. Mm-hmm. As I think Jacques Berliner-Blau pointed out in his reverse biography of Roth,
yeah.
American Pastoral is totally made up by Zuckerman in the context of the book.
Yeah.
There's a point at which there's no other facts here. And then he just starts unloading the story, creates all the drama around what Swede's life may have been from a Zuckerman perspective. But yeah, the sense of, again, the metafictions and the overlapping universes, I suppose, of Roth's writing, and showing that fragmentedness of his own self in the course of the biography as you do. Well, I don't want to say it's a hall of mirrors, but, it must have been awfully difficult to try to pair or parse what's, Roth wrote this, Roth felt that, versus,
yes. Yeah.
Zuckerman says this, and yeah.
Yeah, that is the next biography. There is another one being written, as you probably know, by Steve Zipperstein, a Jewish historian at Stanford. He's taking up other matters. I know family is one of the great subjects that Steve will be exploring. But what you're describing is a kind of work which would fluctuate between the biographical and the literary critical, where it's like undoing a recipe. So Jacques can talk about a reverse biography, but I want to undo the Roth recipe and somehow be able to distinguish between what is Zuckerman's view and Zuckerman's reading and writing and Roth's. And that's complicated. And, in my account of Roth, I have a recipe. It's a footnote, and it's a recipe from his mother about how to make a honey cake or something like that. So people overlook that. I mean, this is a biography with a recipe. It has a practical dimension. But now I want to take the recipe of Philip Roth and deconstruct it so that we would be able to, and Jacques would probably be excellent at this, create a chart of who's speaking, who's saying what at this point. And Roth himself, of course, he always played with this, but he's so conscious of it because at the end of the facts, as you remember, he has Zuckerman critique the supposed autobiography that we think Philip Roth wrote. And in Operation Shylock, we have a character called Philip Roth, right? Which is the whole thing. So this is a kind of subterfuge or self-critical dimension to his own work and to his own writing, which is really pretty fascinating.
Jacques did ask if I'd ask you, I'd like to know more about Roth's mental health and if he sometimes, when he wrote fiction, was not entirely there, which ties into the Halcyon crash that Roth had and Operation Shylock coming in the middle of that. I did want to point out, though, before that, one of your previous biographical subjects of Tom Stoppard does point out in Arcadia, if you stir backward, the jam will not come together again.
That's right.
So yes, some recipes can't be deconstructed or undone. So that's maybe more thermodynamics than lifetime, but you do need to keep Stoppard in mind.
It's a goal. It's an ideal, and I think it would make for a very interesting reading of Roth to somehow create these. I don't want to call it a chart, but a kind of structural approach whereby you begin to distinguish, or to use the grammatical term, parse, the differences between the constructed and the, what we will, to be cute, the unconstructed, but I mean the actually lived and the totally made up. But made up from Zuckerman's point of view, though. Not from...
Well, that's part of Jacques' biography. Until he really broke it out, with those charts, I didn't really get the racism. and there are aspects of Roth's work that you're like, you can't really deny it once the numbers start to pile up.
And I think we have to contextualize all this and say that this is really one of the strengths of Roth, is that he's able to create these recipes and this amalgamation and this blending of fact and fiction, to use those old categories, in extremely ingenious and engaging ways. And I think from the point of view of the reader, these become critical avenues of appreciation in terms of Roth as a writer. And we don't want to forget that that's actually what the key thing is here. We're talking about Philip Roth as a writer, pushing aside for the moment all the biographical ups and downs and contradictions and, attitudes and deceptions and all of that, into something which is really literary. And that's why we read Philip Roth, precisely to try and understand this. So I think we just don't want to lose sight of that.
So that gets us to the misogyny question.
Yeah, of course. I was waiting for that.
I mean, to me, and it's something that, the end of my life as a man, where there's just an absolutely savage beating inflicted on the stand-in for his estranged wife.
Yeah.
And then from there you get both the treatments of women in the book and the women in his real life, who you chronicle somewhat in the biography.
Yeah, somewhat, yeah.
Pretty extensively in a fun way. Where do you stand? What's Roth and misogyny mean, I suppose?
Well, yeah.
You mentioned unwarranted female interference as all that Roth resented in a certain way, and his hatred of the New York Times book reviewer, whose name I do not want to
mispronounce. I know who you mean. Right.
Yeah, right. Kakutani, I believe.
I think he has a lot of disrespect for women, broadly speaking. And I think the origins of that are multifaceted. And it may relate to the idea of control, that he felt they were all controlling him. Even if they weren't, he thought they were. And coupled with the sense of deception, which he also felt was related to them, broadly speaking, these are the elements that go into this understanding or belief that they are basically not to be trusted. and that they are always misrepresenting his attitudes, his views, his point of view. They are not submissive in any way. Well, many of them are not. And as a consequence, it's not working out the way he wanted it to be. I think again, a way of putting together the book I know that you want to write, called Philip Roth and Women, and each chapter is on a different, significant woman for him. There are going to be differences, but there are going to be a tremendous number of similarities. And you begin, as of course one must, with his mother. And a lot has been written about the father, Herman, but there has not been as much written about Bess, the mother, and he himself wrote very little about her. He has almost nothing about her in Patrimony, and her absence is very, very notable. And in the other books, while there are mother figures, she doesn't seem to have much prominence. And I think this relates more to a kind of hiding or obscuring her role. And I think that needs to be thought about much more. And you'd have to get into things like journals, letters, diaries, which I think you now could do in order to be more articulate and establish more directly her importance and what that means and meant for him. But she was very sympathetic to his writing, as the father was. And, the stories are told about Portnoy's complaint and how he warned them and how the mother felt so upset. He seems to have these,
My son is delusional, or delusions of grandeur. Yeah.
It turns out he's right. It is a big international thing. But they were very proud. And he warned them, how to deal with the press and with TV and what have you. So, but I still think it's enigmatic, and it's definitely is worth much greater not interpretation, but reading than we've had so far. So, there's one more thing, of course, and I talk about it early in the book. There's secrets, and one of the secrets with the mother is she came from a fairly not well off, but very middle class family. Her parents, or her father, had a fuel business with a brother, and they were doing quite nicely, thank you. So it wasn't as if she came from an underprivileged, shtetl-like environment at all. So it's a very important area which I don't think has been studied adequately.
And the fixation on younger women is just the fixation on younger women that guys in power tend to have.
Well, yeah, as he got older, the women got younger.
Yeah, you notice that? He was age appropriate when there were only like a 30 or 35 year gap near the end.
Right, exactly. I think after Claire Bloom, he said, "Look, I don't need anybody, quite my peer. I want to explore." And he found that with his reputation and his prominence, and good-looking guy, I guess, it could work. Nobody stopped him, and nor did he want to stop. So. It's
again, never in a Me Too, sort of way. Nothing that there was.
No. But it wasn't conscious then in the way it has become in the last decade, I'd say. But that kind of behavior today would not be acceptable, obviously, and not the way he treated these people. He also tended to discard them. Okay, whether they were editors or publicists or even close friends. And there are many examples, and I cite some of them, but especially the women, too. The more the women wanted to get closer to him, the further away he became. And that was repeated frequently, particularly, I'm not going to start mentioning names, they're in the book, when these people wanted to formalize their relationship, or even worse, have children. We won't even.
And that gets me to the question. He writes to, oh gosh, I think it's James Atlas. It's on page 348. I should open it up. He feels stupid for being childless.
Yes, that's a very big moment of revelation. That he.
Do you think it's sincere, or is it the halcyon talking?
No, I think at that moment he was sincere. But this is like towards the end of my life, right? And essentially, with one of the relationships, and I talk about that, he actually goes to see a doctor to see, is it possible for him, I think he's in his early 70s, to father a child. And what he really is asking is, genetically, would the child be healthy or would the child not be healthy? No, I think he came to some very late stage revelations. And one of those is that he himself never became a father. Yes, he, had many friends with children, and he doted on some of these children, and he felt close to them, but he still wasn't a father. And I think...
And this was in his 50s when that... It's a letter to David Reef.
David Reef,
David Reef,
Susan Sontag's son,
Right. Which was the subject of one of our recent episode I had with Julie Phillips, who did this wonderful book on mothers who were writers or artists.
Oh, yes.
And the balance of that. And Sontag comes off least favorably of all of her subjects.
Okay.
Well, of course, that one. It's pretty interesting. But yeah, so he's in his 50s when he makes that childless comment, not in his 70s at that point. I know he goes for that consultation.
With one of his late girlfriends that, he actually thinks, gee, maybe we could do this, and can I do it? But again, the can I is more of a genetics question rather than a physical question.
Yeah. And that sense of what being a father would have meant for an artist like that.
It would have been very different for him. I think it would have absorbed a lot of oxygen. And I think in a lot of ways he would have been more flexible and malleable in terms of interaction, educating and discovering what it means to be a child. And again, a few people have written about children in Roth, but the children are not really young children. And of course, the most interesting, I think, again, is American Pastoral with Swede's daughter. But there are others that appear. Letting Go is all about, infants and adoption and children, but he doesn't take it on. It's not Henry James. Even Henry James writes in What Maisie Knew, right, about children. It didn't really interest Roth that much until, again, these late moments. And the interest comes from his physical relationships with women. It's not because culturally he feels this is something I need to write about. He didn't need to write about it. He didn't want to write about it.
And you include that story with the cats. Somebody gives him a couple of cute little kittens, and they're absolutely wonderful. And he realizes, I'll never get my work done because I'm enjoying these cats too much, and gives them back.
Yeah, they're a bother.
They're
distracting.
That with kids.
They're not part of my plan.
Yeah, but they bring joy, and yet you can't have that unalloyed joy of a connection with these animals. Very complex figure.
Well, complex. And then there are questions, and there should be more questions than answers. And one of them is, what really brought joy to Philip Roth's life? Okay. Mm-hmm. Was it being on the bestseller list? He was very, very determined to get on that bestseller list. Was it a kind of public prestige and adulation? Was it a close, intimate, lasting relationship with people? I mean, you do wonder what made him happy. Friendships, but they were all very tenuous.
That's what I was going to say. Everything you cite, they're all conditional. And as you said, he would cut anyone off. At the slightest threat to himself, which raises the big question for me. When I recorded with Benjamin Taylor, who was Roth's, we'll say, best friend for the last 20 years or so, 15 years.
15 years, yeah.
Taylor's good friends with Vivian Gornick.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
he in our podcast he goes on about how wonderful it is just going for long walks with Vivian in New York, and what a great raconteur she is, and all this wonderful stuff about her, which led to my recording with her. And yeah, trying to reconcile that, since Gornick had very, very strong words about Roth's misogyny,
oh,
especially coming
absolutely.
after My Life as a Man, which,
Absolutely.
lumped him and Mailer together after that horrific American Dream book by Mailer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered about he stayed friends with Taylor, who was friends with a person who really vilified Roth. But I guess there's also, late in life, there's only so many friends you can keep cutting off. You make concessions, I suppose.
Well, and I think Ben is smart and knows that I have to keep these people in their compartments.
Right.
I'm not going to talk to Philip about the wonderful weekend I just had with Vivian, discovering new haunts on the Lower East Side. I mean, he knew that there were areas you don't go. And again, I think he suggests some of that in the memoir, Here We Are. But Roth felt that he could, and this is a very important word for Philip Roth, trust. He could trust Ben. And I think Ben met that trust without question. I mean, he's the one who is closest at the very, very end. And he and one other had, the kind of medical proxies, the allowing, if there was no chance, of resuscitation or anything of that sort, to make that final decision. That's pretty weighty and responsible. So I think Ben deserves a lot of credit, and it meant a lot to Roth to have a person like Ben, because he didn't really have anyone else. Certainly not on the female side, and all the women and the many that came to see him at the end, and who I know attended the funeral, they were there, but it was not the same.
Right. I mean, it's too obvious a literary thing to make of it, but Ben's a gay man. And so, and Roth lost a lot of the heterosexual male friends of his life.
Yeah.
Just at that age, people start dying off. But it's the weird, you're a man, so I can have conversations with you, but you're not competing with me with women. It almost feels like that's part of the dynamic.
It could be. It could be.
Not that they're good friends, but that there's also that particular fit, I suppose.
Yes.
Which I think Ben even brings up in the memoir. I think he has something to that effect, being a unique figure in those terms.
Well, of course, and then we get to this point in the discussion, you flip it around, and you could say the part of Roth's connection with Blake Bailey.
So that's my next question. When you talk about trust, literary figures, etc., is it the greatest literary irony ever?
Yeah, exactly.
But the guy who was so concerned with betrayal but yeah, go on. Sorry.
Well, no, that connection in part is solidified by the attitude towards women they both share, which of course then becomes exceedingly and embarrassingly public after Roth's death and Blake's book comes out. And so that is a sequel of sequels that no one anticipated. I don't know who really, if anyone, knew the depth of it or the extent of it, but as Ben Taylor would say, here we are. Okay. Yeah. And what a story. What a story.
Yeah, not to talk trash about another biographer or anything, but yeah, I mean, it's almost like a Zuckerman. It's like a sequel to Exit Ghost.
Yes,
that Zuckerman finally gets the biography he really wanted, and the entire thing gets submarined by a sex scandal that isn't even about him.
Yeah, exactly. That's the irony of ironies. So again, it's still a little too fresh. It's only about 14 months, I think, since the two books, mine and Blake's, came out. So I think we need to assess this a bit more before anybody makes any assessment of it or evaluation of it. I mean, obviously, journalists jumped at it, and everybody put in their 2 cents or 5 cents. But it's part of the story, which is going to make the Roth story fascinating, because you've got something happening here which was really a surprise to many people, starting with the publisher and carrying on from there. So I don't know what the next step is going to be, but it's a Rothian story, isn't it? I mean,
has there been any word? The conditions apparently were that Bailey was supposed to destroy a bunch of Roth's records after the book came out. Has there been any? Have you heard anything in terms of?
I've heard that that's not going to happen, but at the same time, I've heard access to that is going to be very, very restricted. So it may not be for 50 years that people are going to be able to, see what's there. But the general impression is it's not going to be destroyed, but it's not going to be made. How do you like that? Very kind of Kafka-esque, right?
Yeah. It's and in keeping with what happened to the rights to Kafka's stuff, in fact, with the Israeli ownership. And
Yes, I know that. So, I mean, there we are. We're at a very Rothian moment, whether you want to talk about the biography and, the fate of biography, apropos Roth in general, or like the Prague orgy, the fate of these documents and what's going to happen and who is and when will people be able to access them. I do want to say, though, that I understand that additional materials not related to my work or Blake's work is slowly becoming available, and the archives, whether you're talking about Princeton or the Library of Congress or maybe even Yale, will have some very interesting additions to them. And I think that's exciting too. So the Roth scholarship is very much, I think, maybe I've used the word too much, evolving, and it's going to go through a new phase. And I think this is typical of the writing of many contemporaries. You finally get some biographies that try to present the life, however you want to define it, but that becomes the building blocks or the stepping stones for new work, for new research, for new material. And I think I see this personally in work I have done on Leonard Cohen. I know there's, of course, a biography came out after mine, which is good, covers similar materials, but in a different way. But most importantly, there's a very substantial archive, which is in the process of being organized, cataloged, what have you, and its final destination is not clear. But once that gets established, that will lead to more work and good work on, say, a figure like Leonard Cohen. And we just see it now with Bob Dylan, right? And the establishment, the opening of the Dylan Archive in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
So between Leonard Cohen and the fact that you use process instead of process, I have to ask, how did you end up in Canada, and when did you feel that you'd really become a Canadian?
Well, the answer to that is Ada Louise Huxtable. Do you know who she is?
Yes, the architectural writer.
Yes, she wrote an article.
A collection of hers. Well, I can't read it from over here, but I think it's of architecture.
When I was finishing graduate school, I've always been interested in travel. She wrote an article about Vancouver. And I said, this really sounds quite interesting. I think I'll go for a couple of years. Well, I've been here a long time. But it also coincided with an interest of mine, and that was Asia. And Vancouver being halfway, you might say, between New York and Singapore or Shanghai, at least in my mind at the time, was a possibility. And then over the last, decade or decade and a half, I've been doing a lot over there, visiting, lecturing, meeting people, teaching. And, we have a very good airport. And you can go east or west, and sometimes south. So it all kind of worked out, but it was not part of a plan.
Gotcha.
It was just a space and a place that seemed different. But the irony is my daughter is in New York and my son is here in Vancouver, and he went to university in New York. So everything is bi-coastal and truly international. But this is the way, certainly academia has developed. maybe a little less so these days, given various, not just COVID, but, sort of the finances of academia. But it's been terrific. So from Rahway, New Jersey to Vancouver, British Columbia.
Yeah, I still live in Ringwood, New Jersey. I've been here my entire life. In the house I grew up in, I'm still here, which always freaks people out. But
yeah.
Keeps me close enough to New York, but not too close.
Yeah, it was also, to be personal, working in university for an airline, and that really I just went, and I haven't stopped. And during the COVID period, the last 2 years plus, I've certainly had a carry-on bag packed, ready to go off. And that will happen again very quickly. So
yeah, I go in 1 month. I go to Los Angeles as a precursor to a biotech conference in San Diego. It'll be the first time I get on a plane since February 2020. So that'll be something
exciting. So the things have kind of come together, but the subjects I've chosen are writers. In the case of Leonard, a singer who means something, and I am trying to understand who they are and how did they become the people that they became. And certainly in coming to Canada, everybody was talking about Leonard Cohen and what's the deal with Leonard Cohen. So each one is a kind of exploration and curiosity.
I figure we'll need to talk further on the whole nature of biography separate from Roth after this. We'll have another episode, I hope, if you haven't been having a bad experience. But your favorite Roth novel?
The Ghostwriter. The Ghostwriter is a distillation of so many of the influences on Roth and the themes of Roth. It has certain biographical resonances, obviously, and it's wonderfully written. And here again, an editor is crucial. Victoria Geng, G-E-N-G, who was at the New Yorker. She had a very strong role in the final form of the book, and she became a very close friend. And then again, sadly, and this happened to Roth a number of times, she became very ill, and he provided the kind of medical coverage and financial support that was necessary to help her really at the end. So there were moments in his life, there's no question, where I don't want to sound ungenerous at all, where he helped people. But it wasn't across the board by any means. And
other times the money was instrumental.
Yeah.
As opposed to giving. Yeah.
So we could go on for a long time about this writer. And again, we haven't even spoken of competition. Competition for Roth is Bellow and Updike. Bellow, older though, and, kind of in a different category than, say, Updike or Mailer. Those were the immediate competitors, each very different. So
like I said, he considered Bellow as the father of them all, at least of that cohort.
Yes, and I think one of Philip Roth's proudest possessions, and you I hope saw it at the library, is the top hat that Bellow wore when he got the Nobel Prize. And
is there anything from the Roth auction you would have bought? Did you buy anything? Or is there something you would have bought?
I made some bids, but they didn't go very far. I like the mirror that he had there. I know someone who bought the record player. There was some heavy bidding on the Kafka, photograph. Obviously, it was a reproduction. But it was very interesting, again, that he would want or allowed these goods to be just, dispersed in that particular way. And I recall some very good articles written about the auction itself, who was there, what people paid, the suitcase. I know someone else who bought a suitcase, sitting over there in the corner. I did not. So
I went with the cheap thing and just grabbed a couple of his extra copies from the library. So, I got off easy.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, it's the sense of letting go. He didn't, the memorial, there's not a statue, is there, to Philip Roth? I know there's a plaque on the apartment building in New York, a small plaque. But I think the best memorial, and he did it, was the library.
Yeah.
His personal library, because of the notes and because of the ephemera and because of things they have found inside the books. When you speak to the librarian, Nadine.
She talks about all these things. Well, this is also part of the favorite or non-favorite Philip Roth question. I asked her how much Roth she knew before all this began. She said, well, I did a crash course and I've been working my way through the books. She, like most other people I talk to, they don't like a book that's one of my favorites, and I think a key to later Roth, which is Sabbath Theater.
Oh, yes. Yes.
There are a lot of people who just, couldn't finish it. I put it down, unwilling to read it. I'm like, really? That's exactly what I dived into it for. But, I get how that's an off-putting book.
That book is, I'm glad you brought it up, because I don't think it is or has received the kind of positive reading that it should have. But the book is, I see a kind of workshop. It's like the basement of the house of Philip Roth.
Oh, it's the roots of everything that comes after. The American trilogy, all of the quintet, all of that stuff is all seeded.
And what does he choose to read from at his 80th birthday party but that late section in Sabbath Theater where Mickey Sabbath goes to the cemetery and he reads all the gravestones? Of all the work that Philip Roth should select, it should be Sabbath Theater and that melancholic, bittersweet goodbye. And obviously he was saying goodbye to his audience. But I think Sabbath Theater has got it all, but it's like something boiling on the stove, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it bubbles over and sometimes it doesn't. And all you need to do is sit yourself down, put your seatbelt on, and jump into it. Because I think that's Roth. That is, and he said it was his favorite book. He never felt so free writing. He told that to David Remnick as when he was working on Sabbath Theater. It's a release, and it's also post Claire Bloom.
Right. And so much, like you bring up throughout the course of the book, is how much the writing being connected to key moments in his life or these after effects of them.
Yeah. I also like very much I Married a Communist. It's kind of
you really play that one up, and I've only read it once, and your depictions of it in the book have me thinking I need to go back to all three from the trilogy.
That was actually, to digress momentarily, the title of a film that Howard Hughes produced. I think it was 1947. And they showed it in previews with I Married a Communist. It was part of a whole series of anti-communist movies being released at that time. And the audience hated the title. And so they retitled the film The Woman on Pier 13, which is not I Married a Communist. Now, did Roth see that film? He was a teenager, adolescent. I don't think so, but you never know. But it's a very interesting connection. And then I drew parallels between the film and what goes on in I Married a Communist. It's also a kind of workshop novel. Like everything is out there, exposed, okay? There, in terms of the big themes, the contradictions, the question of education, which we also need to talk about, it's all there in a blatant way, similar to Sabbath Theater. So I think those three, The Ghostwriter, Sabbath Theater, and I Married a Communist, for me are the real keys, the keynotes.
Gotcha. Question from one of my listeners who's a huge Roth fan. Do you think it's true that he went to his agent's office every year to wait for the Nobel call?
No. Okay. He stayed at home and waited for the call. He didn't go to his agent.
But it was sitting by the phone.
It meant something to him, and he would have liked it. And what it meant was stepping up higher on the ladder of literary prestige. You can't go higher than that. And if Bellow could get it, I could get it. I think he was disappointed but not depressed that he didn't get it. My goodness, he got every other award that you could imagine. But it would have given him the international cachet, which I think at the end of his career he sought. but it didn't. It didn't happen. He probably would have liked the top hat, which he could have put next to Saul Bellow's top hat. We could write, funny things about top hatters and do a little musical about the two of them. But it didn't happen. But again, I think it was more disappointment, not depression. Okay.
And something to be angry about. So,
well, you know what he says? He has that great quote: "People are unjust to anger. It can be enlivening and a lot of fun." Yeah. So you got to, yeah. I mean, he's himself, and
I'm with you. It's an absolutely unique figure in letters, and one that again was lived out loud, and yet again you have to go so deep to try to figure out what's there and what's.
Yeah, I like your phrase, lived out loud. There's no question about it. Okay, it's the truth about Philip Roth. Once he found his footing, and that footing was set up by, I guess, his family. I mean, what he grew out of, and then also the marriage to Maggie. We haven't discussed that much, but that act of deception was something he could never get over. And that's another reason why I think he felt distrustful of women. There was always something that he maybe couldn't, not grasp, but he felt it wasn't fully exposed. And his evidence for that was Maggie and the false pregnancy. So maybe,
and that consequences of misreading women that you bring up in the book. I mean, it falls right into Vivian's perspective of seeing women as not exactly human. There's something else that it's makes things very, very problematic, I guess.
But he couldn't, and we must not forget this, stay away from them.
Oh yeah,
that's the other side of it. Okay.
Which raises my other question, because you mentioned her in passing at the very end, and I've always wondered, Mia Farrow?
Yeah.
Was it a thing or was it a friendship?
It's hard to say. I think it was a minor thing and a friendship that, it was consistent. I mean, it lasted, but it was on the edge. Yeah, I think there was a thing at one point, but he had a thing with most of the women in his life. So.
Oh yeah. No, I'm with you. I mean, it's one of those that until I saw the biography, the American Masters thing, it was one of those, I have a feeling there's something going on here, and it would help explain that Woody Allen movie that bashes the Philip Roth stand-in, Deconstructing Harry, depending on the timing and all that stuff. But
I think really, if you were trying to sum up things, and I said it maybe 15 minutes ago, we're at a period and ready for the next step in terms of Roth and evaluating him, and most importantly, reading him. And so you have the two biographies, soon to be a third. They're stepping stones, and not by anyone's stretch of the imagination any final word. There can be no final word, not even Roth's final word, which he strove so hard to set in, I guess, stone of one sort or another. It ain't happening, okay? So we better tell him. But it's unfolding. We just don't know which direction yet. But that's good. That's healthy.
As my last question, then, does Roth survive? Do younger readers read Roth?
Oh, that is hard to answer. And I think bits will, certain pieces will. But as an entire subject, the way in which I can still take a course on the works of Henry James, I don't know. I think bits and pieces will, and I think he'll fit into certain cultural niches that if you want to read a novel of the impact of the Vietnam War and its impact on families, but maybe not, like not a son who went off and fought and died, you read American Pastoral. If you want to read, and here's a Roth novel no one talks about, American sports, you're doing a course or a seminar.
I will admit I've never read the Great American Novel, and your depiction of it makes me think, God damn it, now I need to go back and read that.
It's very good. It's very good,
Yeah.
especially if you love comedy. And he really put a lot of energy into it. So that would be another one. It's kind of forgotten, but I'm putting them in different categories, right? To do an entire reading of Roth might be kind of problematic from a student's point of view, starting with the question today of women and his depiction of women, pushing aside all the other themes and issues we have been talking about. But if you want a writer who focuses on family, I think you have Philip Roth. Okay, and maybe that's sort of 15, 25, 50 years from now. That's maybe how he will be read. Also, Roth as a writer about writers, and that's where something like The Ghostwriter, I think, has an instrumental role. The other works, I'm not so sure. We're going to have to redo this interview in about 35 years, and then we can provide a clearer.
We'll both be around for it. That'll be great. Because honestly, I came up with another, I don't think it was on mic, so I don't want to mention him by name, but a literary writer I was recording with who said, Roth, he thinks Nabokov, Lolita, he's like, these things aren't going to survive. College kids, they don't want to read this. These are things they'll have an academic audience. It's different, but having a readership, and where things go, it's a question of literary immortality, which suffuses so much of Roth's, work on what an artist does and what outlasts them.
Well, yeah, and as a footnote to that comment, Philip Roth had six copies of Lolita in his library, and they are all in the personal library in Newark, and many of them, because I've seen them all, I've done something on Roth and Lolita, very heavily marked. So that was the one Nabokov. He had a few other Nabokov works, but that was the one that meant something to him. He was teaching it. He did teach it at Penn, but he also incorporated some dimensions of Lolita in his work. And for that, you'll have to wait until my article appears.
Perfect. Last question then. What are you reading? Doesn't have to be Roth, but, who have you been reading
actually,
lately?
This may surprise you. I've been reading many Russian writers, and I am working.
I'm shocked. Do you hear?
Yeah, I know that. I believe me, I started this long before current world events. I'm interested in the subject of love and Russian literature. And more specifically, I'm exploring individual writers and their contact with Russia, in which they have a Russian romance. And the clearest example might be Walter Benjamin, who went to Moscow in 1926 in pursuit of a Latvian actress. And he writes a diary about this. Or H.G. Wells, who has a 13-year relationship with a Russian woman who was Maxim Gorky's secretary, and she was also a spy. So I'm trying to account for these relationships, and there are many other figures, and it's quite fascinating. So, and then I use Turgenev and I use some Tolstoy as a backdrop for this. So, in other words, comparing, if you will, the treatment of love in Russian literature matched against the actual experiences of about 8 or 9 mostly Anglo figures who go to Russia and fall in love, and what happens. And I will say it doesn't end happily.
What Russian ever does, please.
Well, there you go. I've been thinking about that. I haven't come up with anyone yet.
Oh, really?
There you are.
But Ira, thanks so much for coming on. I love the biography. Let's make it less than 35 years. Let's get together in a couple of years for a follow-up on this
Excellent.
and other literary topics.
I'm up for it anytime, Gil.
And if I make the trip out to Vancouver, or if you come out here for the Philip Roth Personal Library, let me know and we can do this in person.
Absolutely. I would love to do that as well. Thank you so much.
And that was Ira Nadel. His most recent book is Philip Roth, A Counterlife, from Oxford University Press. As you can tell, I enjoyed it a lot, and of the 2 biographies of Roth that came out last year, I am glad this is the one that I read. And when I have time, I'd love to get around to some of Ira's other biographies, like the ones on Stoppard and Leonard Cohen. Now, Ira is not on social media, near as I can tell, maybe Facebook, but I've been off of that for 5 years, so whatever. But I will have a link to his faculty page at UBC, so you can learn more about him and his work, as well as some of his scholarly papers there. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this guy out here doing these interesting conversations with neat, creative people week after week. You can also help out the show by writing me. Tell me what you like and don't like about the show, who you'd like to hear me record with, what movie or TV show or book or music or piece of art or theater or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. You can do that by sending me a postcard or a letter, sending me an email, maybe a DM on Twitter or Instagram, but you can also leave a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That one goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about me picking up and getting stuck in an awkward conversation. Messages can be up to 3 minutes long, so if you're going to go super long, call back and leave a second message. And let me know if it's okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. I would never do that without the caller's approval, but if you've got something you want the listeners to hear, just give me the say-so, and I'll include it in an upcoming show. If you've got money or time or resources to spare, I hope you'll help out individuals and institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Topato.go, and other crowdfunding platforms. And if you're looking for somewhere to start with institutions or foundations, you can look to your local food bank. I donate to mine every month. The Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, Election Funds, Planned Parenthood, Women's Choice. There are all sorts of things you can do to help us build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.